Welcome to Keep It Electric, episode 64, recorded on November the 22nd. We're nearing the end of our trades grade series for the 2024 season. And before we jump into today's content, I want to take a quick moment to thank all of you who've been tuning in regularly. It really does mean the world to me. Every week I've noticed a little bit of an uptick in traffic, and I can't tell you how much it fuels me to keep going here. So if you're enjoying the podcast, don't forget to follow, share it with a friend or a fellow sports fan. If you have a minute, leaving a review would be a huge help. Tell me what you're loving about the show, even what you think could be better. Your feedback not only helps me improve, but also helps other fans discover my podcast. Now, I'm here to cover the Mariners, bring in some takes on Major League Baseball, connect with this community of baseball fans. I've got to be honest, I've been slacking on Instagram. Yeah, my bad. It's not my best effort. But if you haven't already, go ahead and follow the Keep It Electric Instagram page. I post snippets there, maybe from today's show, from previous shows. I'd love for you to engage with those as well. I am responsive over there, even if my posting game isn't where it should be. That's something I'm working on, and it's all a part of my commitment to bringing you the best Mariners content every Friday. Enough about that. Let's dive into today's episode. Honestly, it's been a pretty quiet week since our last episode. The biggest news, a lot of players declining qualifying offers. Let's be real, that's not exactly groundbreaking news. Teams extend those offers knowing they're likely going to be declined so they can secure draft pick compensation. It's more of a procedure than it is newsworthy, so we're not going to spend any time on that. Let's shift gears to something that is newsworthy, especially for us Mariners fans. It's time to celebrate. Rejoice. Because there's big news about our catcher, Cal Raleigh. If you haven't heard, here's why you should be excited. Cal Raleigh has dropped Scott Boras as an agent, as his agent. Now, if you're familiar with Scott Boras, you know what a significant move this is. Boras has a reputation. He's the guy who ensures his players get top dollar. He's a master at manipulating free agency. He gets teams into bidding wars. And quite frankly, he mainly prices his players out of budgets for small market teams like the Mariners. That's why he represents so much top tier talent. He gets results, but sometimes those results come at a cost. So let's think about this or reflect on last season. Last season showcased just how disruptive Boras can be. We saw negotiations drag into spring training, some of them into the regular season. All these for players that he represented. Take Jordan Montgomery. I think he's the best example. He had the worst season of his career after missing crucial spring training time due to drawn-out negotiations. That disruption doesn't just affect the player, it impacts the team. With Boras representing Cal Raleigh, it seems like the Mariners' odds of extending him long-term were slim to none. Historically, Boras pushes his clients to test free agency, often pricing them out of their current team's budget. So now, things have changed. Why does this move matter? Dropping Boras, Raleigh has drastically shifted the narrative. This move doesn't guarantee that he'll sign with Seattle, but it does make it a lot more likely. Let's break it down. Timeline. Cal Raleigh isn't a free agent until after the 2027 season. That gives the Mariners some time to prepare financially for what will likely be a significant payday for him. But with Boras being out of the picture, that eliminates a major roadblock to getting a deal done early, before he even hits free agency. That's what we really want. And here's the bigger picture. That kind of move screams that Raleigh might have some interest in locking down his future sooner rather than later. Whether that's signing a team-friendly extension or negotiating a deal that secures his bag, but altogether, it keeps him in Seattle. It signals that he's open to stay. And for Mariners fans, that's huge. So Raleigh has become one of the best catchers in baseball, if not the best catcher in baseball. I will always say that he's the best, and that's probably biased, but honestly, if you look at his stats over the last couple of years, it's starting to prove it. His power at the plate, his ability to handle the pitching staff, and his steady defensive presence makes him irreplaceable on the roster. Locking him down long term would be a game changer and should be a priority. It's not just for the team's performance, but it's also for the team's culture. And let's not forget the implications for the Mariners' top prospect, Harry Ford. He's not skating free out of this conversation. If Raleigh signs long term, the team has more flexibility in Ford's development. They could move him to another position. They could also extend Cal's career by transitioning him into a DH or first base role later, or even use Ford as trade leverage to strengthen other areas of the roster. Either way, Raleigh staying in Seattle gives the Mariners options, and that's always a good thing. Now, I don't want to get too far ahead of this. Today is a day to celebrate this small victory. The Mariners still have plenty of work to do. Cal Raleigh has made it clear that he isn't satisfied with mediocrity. He's been vocal about his frustrations with the organization's lack of aggressiveness in acquiring talent. If the Mariners want to lock him down, they need to show him and other core players on the roster, but they need to show him that they're serious about building a winning culture and bringing home a World Series to Seattle. So Raleigh isn't just looking for a payday, he wants to win. For the Mariners, that means making the right moves in free agency, trades, and player development to convince him that he's part of a team with a real shot at competing for championships. If they can do that, I think we'll see Raleigh as a long-term Mariner, but it's going to take some time and not just promises. For now, let's savor the moment. Cal Raleigh dropping Scott Boras as his agent significantly increases the chances of keeping one of the best catchers in baseball right here in Seattle. It's not a guarantee, but it's a step in the right direction, and as Mariners fans, we've learned to celebrate these small victories. So here's to the possibility of a future with Cal Raleigh anchoring this team for years to come. Let's hope the front office sees this as an opportunity to lock him down and build a roster that matches his ambitions. Right now, Mariners fans, let me know what you think. Does Cal Raleigh's move make you more optimistic about his future? Let me know your thoughts on my Instagram. Drop a comment whether you're listening to this podcast. And as always, stay tuned. There's plenty of more Mariners talk coming your way. All right, let's get into today's trades grades segment. This time we're focusing on the Mariners starting pitching, a topic that's, not just easy to grade, but also I'm excited to have this conversation. Initially, I was planning to evaluate the pitching staff as a whole, but as I prepped, it became clear this needed to be a two-parter. So today today we're diving into the starting rotation, and in the next and final episode of Trades Grades, we'll tackle the bullpen. So grading the starting rotation is going to be one of the easiest tasks of this entire series, probably right up there with catcher. But they also deserve their flowers. We'll give them to them. I'll give them to them at least. And we'll highlight just how impactful this group was in 2024. Now, before we jump into the grades, I do want to take a quick sidebar. There's been a lot of conversations this week, at least that I've been in tune with. There's been a lot of conversations in the sports world, specifically, this one is regarding LeBron James. So yeah, I'm stepping away and crossing over into basketball for just a split second. It'll make sense. Just bear with me here. LeBron James stepped away from social media. And the reason why this is such a big conversation is because it's based on the balance between positive and negative content and feedback. And it got me thinking about this podcast and how I approach covering the Mariners. Now, I'll admit, there's been times where I've been upset. I've been disappointed by a trade, a loss, a lack of action by the front office. I think we all have felt these things. But for the most part, I feel like I try to keep things level. I aim to focus on the facts, I'll find some silver linings, and I'll keep the dialogue constructive. Now, sure, it's tempting to lean into negativity, especially when that's what gets clicks and comments. But at the end of the day, I really want this podcast to be a space where we celebrate this team and also keep it real. Like, both things could be true. That said, if you have feedback, positive, critical, whatever, I'm open to hear it. And at this point, if you've been listening this long, you know where to find me. All right, back on track here. Today's focus is on the Mariners starting rotation. Let's be honest, they were the crown jewel of the 2024 season. From top to bottom, the group brought their A game all year long. We've got plenty to break down, from individual performances to the overall impact they had on this team's success. So without further ado, let's jump in. right. So when people say the Mariners starting rotation was the best in baseball this season, it's not hype. It's backed by undeniable facts and numbers. The Mariners led the league, these starters led the league with a combined ERA of 3.38. This wasn't about one or two pitchers carrying the load. This was a complete staff delivering elite performances night in and night out. The Mariners racked up 889 strikeouts, first in the AL, second overall in the entire league. More than 8 strikeouts per 9 innings was their average. While opposing hitters were trying to put the ball in play, they spent majority of their time walking back to the dugout in dismay. One of the most overlooked stats, innings pitched. The Mariners excelled there too. They logged a league-leading 942 innings. This is an era where teams lean heavily on their bullpens. Seattle starters consistently worked deep into games. This wasn't just a rotation that put up numbers. It was a rotation that gave the team a chance to win every single day. They shouldered the load, and they kept the bullpen fresh for high leverage situations. These three numbers, complete package, ERA, strikeouts, innings pitched, highlight exactly why this rotation was so special. They weren't just skilled, they were dependable, they were resilient, they were relentless, and they actually set the tone for the Mariners' entire season. The rest of the league knew how good these pitchers were. So, again, this just isn't any rotation. It's a five-headed monster. It's a team that could probably be called the Avengers. Yeah, I'm glazing that hard right now. They could headline their own Marvel movie. Each of them brought a unique skill set to the mound. They made the Mariners rotation a nightmare for opposing lineups. Let's break it down and talk about these guys. So you have Luis Castillo, who was probably the designated ace at the beginning of the season if they were to have one. He's the older guy too. I would probably call him the leader. As for like Luis Castillo, the numbers speak for themselves. 3.64 ERA, 175 strikeouts, 175 innings pitch. I think the biggest highlights for Castillo this season were probably the Mile High Masterclass earlier in the year against the Rockies in the snowstorm. 7 scoreless innings, 9 strikeouts, all in Coors Field where the ball like flies out of that park. Like he was on a playground. He was blowing I think he was blowing like smoke bubbles with the wind chill there. June 2nd, I think the one against the Angels, 7 innings, just a symphony of outs he orchestrated there. And then finally, I think my favorite performance of his was against the Mets, Sunday Night Baseball, 6 innings, 9 Ks, only 1 run allowed. I think that was probably a big statement win for him and the Mariners. And when the lights are bright, Castillo shows up. Next, we have George Kirby, a control freak. Like, if anything, he's plotting every pitch with laser precision. Kirby's control is out of control, if you know what I mean. So, his strikeout to walk ratio was 7.78, which is absurd. It's not just the best in the league. I think he was in his own league with that strikeout to walk ratio. He just does not give free passes. Instead, he forces hitters into his strike zone, and then once they're there, they just leave unhappy. Some of his masterclass performances earlier in the year, April 27th, he put on a show, 12 Ks against the Diamondbacks. May 13th I think that was against the Royals, 92 pitches, 7 shutout innings, and then in September, 21 up, 21 down against the Rangers. Those to me are just the highlights of George Kirby this year. Then you have you have Logan Gilbert, complete workhorse. Every rotation needs a steady workhorse, and Logan Gilbert filled those shoes this year. He pitched 208 innings, 3.24 ERA. He was definitely like the definition of reliable. You knew what you were going to get out of Logan. He's not the flashiest guy, but he is very effective. He mixes his pitches so well. He doesn't lean on just one pitch. He generates swings and misses. He leaves hitters frustrated just like everyone else in the starting rotation. And when the Mariners needed someone to step up, Gilbert was always that guy. I think the highlights for me from Gilbert this year, August 10th, I think a highlight, honestly, sidebar, all the highlights I think are usually against the Mets for the 3 guys that pitched against them. Shut the Mets out, 7 dominant innings. In September, the complete game against the Cardinals. Now, the Mariners did lose that game, but he struck out 10 and threw a complete game in a close one. It's a shame that he didn't get the win in that one. And then a game against the Yankees on September 19th, five and a third, 9 strikeouts. He was just a guy who delivered. Okay. Bryce Miller, I think I was high on Bryce Miller when the Mariners first brought him up. Like, I heard this guy was great. He showed up. He was really good the season before last, and then I didn't expect him to elevate to the level that he elevated himself to this year, which really is just a show of his work ethic. Bryce Miller, 2.94 ERA. His fastball and spin rate is absolutely ridiculous. He was not a guy up here surviving. He was a guy up here thriving. I think the best outings for Bryce Miller, August 9th, 6 scoreless innings against who? Those Mets. Struck out 6, gave up 3 hits. The Mets had a bad time in Seattle, guys. That was a great series. He struck out 10 against the Rays also in August. And then in September, 7 shutout innings against the Astros when we needed the most. That was big for him. Bryce Miller is clearly, I would call this guy the future, or another future. There's multiple futures here in the starting rotation, but like Bryce Miller is a guy you got to hold on to. He's going to do some great things in the Seattle rotation if we hold on to him. And then number 5, we got Brian Wu. And Brian Wu, like, he proved himself time and time again, even through the injuries that he was going through. Finished the year 2.89 ERA. I think he threw 121 innings. In May, when he first came in, 6 innings against the Yankees, struck out 7. That was huge. That was before the Yankees lineup got absolutely, utterly ridiculous because he had a bad time against them later in the year. We're not going to talk about that, though. Later, I guess a couple weeks later in June, struck out, I think, 7 against the A's, 6 scoreless innings. And then again, he dominated the A's again at the end of the year. Struck out 8 in 5 innings. So with these 5 guys, I mean, this rotation is an absolute force of nature. Clutch performances all throughout the year. These clutch performances by these 5 guys, they are the backbone of the team. And we can't just sit here and say that this is a good rotation. We can't sit here and say that this is a great rotation. This rotation this past year was it was just legendary. It was just such a great season from the group. Everyone was talking about them. They're making waves across all of social media, across many networks, and they really put the Mariners on the map to a level that I don't think anyone really could imagine that they were going to do in this 2024 season. So I think, like, when it comes down to it, what made this rotation one of the best in baseball, I don't think it really just comes down to talent, even though the talent was there. They had plenty of talent. It was also the combination that each pitcher had. They had a unique combination of elite pitching. The strategy that these guys used was also, props to the Mariners crew, the Mariners coaching crew and their analytics. Like, their strategy created a fearless approach for all these pitchers. And let's just break down why they're so dominant here. So Luis Castillo, his changeup actually wasn't the best in the world this year, but he can still trade that changeup and mix it well with his fastball and his sinker. So even though I believe his opponents hit like 280 off of that changeup, and that changeup hurt him quite a bit, his mixture of pitches kind of saved him a little bit because this was actually kind of a down year for Luis Castillo, all things considered. You have George Kirby. His fastball is just ridiculous. It's pure precision. It's just amazing. I think the only issue you could probably call out with Kirby is that his obsession with throwing strikes can get him into trouble. But I'm telling you what, if you're throwing 7.78 strikeout to walk ratio and the ERA that he posted this year, just keep doing it. I mean, if he wants to be perfect, yeah, he's got to find a way to get some people to chase his pitches outside the zone for strike 3. But all in all, he's still young and he's still figuring it out. And for young and figuring it out, Just an absolutely amazing season for him. Logan Gilbert, he zeroed in on mixing his pitches up a lot. I believe he didn't throw a single pitch more than like 40% of the time. I think he threw his fastball fewer times than his sliders and his curveball. Like really, he just kept hitters off balance, and no one really knew what his go-to weapon was. So, like, props to Logan Gilbert. Brian Miller, fastball. It's just that simple. Like he started to, I believe he mixed in a splitter. Most of them started mixing in a splitter this year, but Bryce Miller's fastball and that spin rate saves him every time. So it's really hard for the hitters to jump and get a good read on what he's throwing. And then Brian Wu, he brought in that cutter as well. Brian Wu is just nasty. He's I don't know if anyone notices, but he's got this short torso and these long legs, and he can really get the ball up on you really fast. So for a guy who's throwing average fastball 92 to 95 miles an hour, it looks a lot faster for some of those guys at the plate. So together, these guys brought a variety of looks that really made this rotation one of the hardest to face in all of baseball. I think the other thing is their attack mentality. Each one of them, they really set the tone. So what sets this staff apart, it's not just their pitches, it's how they use them. I think Logan Gilbert was the best reference I could use for this one. They didn't mess around with their hitters. They went right after them. With one of the highest first pitch strike rates in the league, the Mariners pitchers forced their hitters to play on their terms. They get ahead. That's something that they preach. So getting ahead in counts, they not only gave them the upper hand, but also allowed them to expand the zone and make hitters chase their pitches that they had no business swinging at all. So this attack mentality wasn't about just being flashy. It was about being relentless. And hitters knew from the first pitch that they were in for a tough at bat every single time. So, the pitching development is what I was talking about earlier. Like they are definitely the unsung heroes. Behind every great rotation is a great coaching staff that helps them unlock their potential, and the Mariners staff deserves major credit here. It's not just about refining mechanics with them; it's about game planning and adaptation. Opposing teams adjust throughout the season, and the Mariners rotation just stayed one step ahead of them. And you can really credit the coaching staff and even credit Cal Raleigh. I think Cal Raleigh gets a lot of credit with this too because he's the one who's calling these games and doing a lot of homework research and watching a lot of film on these batters. So let's not forget about Cal Raleigh and how great he's been. And I think I've touched on Cal Raleigh in the last 3 episodes, so you can kind of tell how high I am on him right now. So let's also not forget about them developing arms like Bryce Miller and Brian Wu. Both of those guys, they called up from Arkansas, from Double A. They skipped over Tacoma. So they stepped into a major league rotation and immediately delivered at that level. That is insane. That's a testament to both their talent and the coaching that they received. So elite pitches, fearless mentality, great coaching staff. That's the winning formula for this group of pitchers. So that's just it. That's just the way it is. So I'm gonna go to the final grade here. After all that praise and after all that glazing, for lack of a better word, it's no surprise that the Mariners second rotation, I'm gonna give them an A plus. And sure, if you ask the rotation themselves, they'd probably have a list of things that they want to improve on. But let's be honest here, because this ERA is ridiculous and their stats and numbers are ridiculous. The staff consistently delivered, and like our offense continuously rewarded them with the King's treatment. Now, like I've talked about the King's treatment before, named after none other than the great King Felix Hernandez. Time and time again, the pitching kept the Mariners in games, giving the offense a chance to win. And more often than not, that's exactly what happened. I mean, you look at the record over, 53, 54% of the time, that's what happened. But even in rare moments where someone needed to fill in, like when Brian Wu dealt with early season soreness, or Luis Castillo when he was injured towards the end of the year, Emerson Hancock stepped in. And I don't want to leave him out of this because he did pitch at the major league level a little bit this year. Emerson Hancock is a luxury. He spends most of the season in Tacoma, and then, a pitcher might go down for a game or two, and he's the one that we call. he seized every opportunity given to him in the rotation. And Hancock is the kind of guy who could easily be a solid fourth or fifth starter. He could even probably be a number 3 on some rosters. So, I don't think we should be underestimating him. Um, that said, Hancock still has a lot of work to do, particularly in upping his strikeout rate. That's probably not quite where the Mariners want it yet, and he even says it himself. But this is exactly why Seattle isn't rushing to move any of their core starters. I know there's been chatter about trading a starter, bringing in a bat. Logan Gilbert's name just consistently gets thrown out there, and now Castillo's name is being thrown out there. And honestly, I don't want to see any of them go. If it had to happen and I had to choose, it would be Castillo. I think Castillo might make the most sense from a salary perspective. But let's not dive into those hypotheticals. The reality is this rotation should stay intact, and why fix what isn't broken? So that's going to wrap up today's episode. I want to thank you again for tuning in and sticking with me through this trades grades journey. We've got one final grade left, and that's going to be next Friday. We're going to tackle the Mariners bullpen. That's going to be a fun one. Make sure you tune in. As always, if you're enjoying the podcast, don't forget to follow, share it with a friend, a fellow sports fan, leave a review. I'd love to hear your feedback and interact with you on Instagram as well, so make sure you give that a follow. Until next time, keep it electric. Go Mariners!